It is just 5 days after I got back from Accra, Ghana, and it's taken me a little bit of time to readjust to the time and get a good night's sleep. But fortunately, the last 2 nights have gone well, and I'm feeling pretty well adjusted now. And it was a very eventful trip. I did not get to play in the World Scrabble Championship, and this means that this ban has now gone beyond the original 3 years that it was. And there is lots more to follow up on in terms of the politics of this and advocating for justice for me. But I'm actually not going to talk about it in this video. The purpose of this video is instead to tell another story from a different time in my life that I think sheds some light on why I am approaching these things the way I am and why I believe this is actually a very, very important fight for justice, not just for me, but for building a better Scrabble world. So the story that I'm going to tell is actually a real life story that happened to me many years ago when I was a high school teacher. It's a professionally related story, and I was also married at the time. And it is the case that I had been working at a particular high school for about 7 years, and this actually happened in the last year that I was working there. I had a particular high school senior mathematics class in which one of my students, who was a bright kid, who was very capable but lazy and didn't do a lot of the work, got a bad grade in the first quarter. He ended up getting a C+. Now, to be clear, the way this school worked, it was a semester grading system. So this quarterly grade wasn't even an official grade on the transcript. It was just a progress report. But it was something that when I was at the colleges, it could potentially have impact on college admissions. So I think some parents and students were skittish about this because of that. And it so happened that the student who I gave this C+ to, and I just didn't give it to him, he earned it. It was the grade that he truly was supposed to get based on the quality of his work, was the son of a member of the board of trustees of the school. And his parents, I never met either of them in person. They did not come to back to school night or to parent-teacher conferences, which is usually where I would first meet the students' parents. They never called up my office or requested a meeting with me or had a phone call with me. I literally had zero interaction of any kind with these parents. However, the father, who was on the board of trustees, did chew on the ear of the headmaster of the school about this situation. And it was the case that what ended up happening was I ended up getting news from my department chair, who had heard it from the principal of the upper school, or maybe from the grade level advisor. There were a few levels up there. And then the principal, who had heard it from the headmaster, that it was dictated that I had to give this student a retake of the test and an opportunity to raise his grade for this quarter. I heard this news, and I could tell that my department chair and everyone else above was shocked to be getting this news because it was not a proper procedure at all. And it was the case that I just laughed when I heard it. And I said, I actually referred to the headmaster's first name, but I won't say it here. I just laughed and said, you say, tell so-and-so, I'll be happy to talk to him in his office about this as soon as possible. So what was supposed to happen, and what had been common practice, and I'd actually been at that school a lot longer than this headmaster, he was relatively new to the school, was that if a parent or student had an issue with teachers handling a situation, they were supposed to talk to the teacher first. And if they could not get satisfaction with the teacher, then they escalate to the level of the department chair. If they can't get satisfaction there, they escalate to the level of the grade level advisor, and then to the level of the principal of the upper school, and only then to the headmaster. So you work your way up the chain of command. And it was very much the case that if somebody tried to skip that chain of command and go to somebody higher, they were supposed to push them down. They were supposed to say, no, deal with the teacher. Have you talked to the teacher yet? Have you talked to the department chair yet? Don't talk to me before you've talked to them. However, that wasn't what was done here. And when I met up with the headmaster, we had a really interesting conversation. So what happened was, it was clear, I got the story from the headmaster, that the parents of this student, or I should say father in particular, had really duped the headmaster and given him a very false story of what was going on here. And part of the story this headmaster had heard and believed wholesale was that I had been a teacher who was really emotionally checked out and not putting my work into the class, and had been allowing students to watch movies in class. Now, I clarified to the headmaster that on day one of the class, I had shown my students a 10-minute long movie about work ethic. This was something that's actually from one of the Franklin Covey training videos. I was very into the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and a lot of the self-improvement stuff of related to that around that time. And I had gotten this video with one of the books I bought that had a bunch of these short training and inspirational videos. I just happened to like this one little thing and used it in my opening class just as a way of inspiring my students. So that was it. I showed a 10-minute movie about work ethic on day one. And then Thanksgiving time, it was very common practice that students would often not be there the Wednesday before Thanksgiving because they were traveling for the holidays or something. So oftentimes that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we only have about half of our class there. And what I did when I didn't have many of my class members there is I sometimes give a day off to just watch a movie. And that's what I did that particular time. So literally, the only movie watching that happened was a 10-minute movie about work ethic on day one. And then the day before Thanksgiving, when only half the class was present, allowing them to take a break for a day to watch a movie. And this was an AP class, by the way, that was moving at a pretty brisk pace following the advanced placement curriculum. So it's not like I was slacking off or not pushing these kids hard in general. I was. It was just they had that one-day break before Thanksgiving. But, of course, this father had totally twisted this into a story about me being a negligent teacher and goofing off and just letting students watch movies in class. Furthermore, this actually came around the same time that this article had just come out about me in New Jersey Monthly Magazine about my time in Scrabble, which kind of depicted me as a bad boy of Scrabble. And I made a mistake in terms of mentioning offhand to the reporter of that article that I was going through a divorce at the time, which really wasn't that relevant to the story. And he only mentions it in one sentence in passing in the article. It's a really tiny part of the article. But it wasn't public knowledge to a lot of the people I worked with, both students and teachers at the time, that I was going through a divorce. So the fact that I mentioned it and brought an attention to it, I think made things a little awkward in terms of people getting that news. And another lie that this father had told the headmaster is that he was giving these stories of depicting how I was behaving in class and saying that I was just exasperated and acting defeated and all this type of stuff, and had said something along the lines to the students of how, oh, I'm going through such a hard time, going through a divorce at home, just stop giving me such a hard time. And this was completely fabricated, completely untrue. I had not lost my cool in the class. I had kept my home life and my work life separated. I had said zero to any of my students about me going through a divorce. It was just a case that they got this little snippet of news from this article, and then the father spun it into this false story that I said something about going through a divorce in the classroom. So I pointed out all these things to the headmaster in our conversation, that this was very intentional false information, that I had never had such a conversation in front of my students, that I had not been goofing off and watching movies with the students in class either. But I also clarified a few other things that the headmaster did not understand about the story. One of which was that this same student who had done poorly on this test, I had already required him to come in for extra help for an hour after school one day and go over the entire test with me. And I forced him to redo the questions in front of me and learn how to do the material properly. And in the course of doing that, this was a statistics class where we had to use graphing calculators that had a lot of statistical tests built into them, things like, chi-square test, stuff like that. We have to press a sequence of buttons to do a statistical test. That there were several of the tests that the students had to do on the graphing calculator that had been part of their homework problems and that were very clear requirements going into the test that the student didn't even have the most basic idea of how to do on his calculator at the time that we were reviewing the test. So it was very, very obvious to me that the student had been totally unprepared, had just not been doing his homework at all, let alone doing adequate preparation for the test, because he would have had to know how to do some of these statistical tests in the calculator to even get those homework problems done. So I explained this whole thing to the headmaster, made very clear that I am very confident that this is exactly the grade the student deserves on the test. He did not put the adequate work in the beginning of the semester. He slacked off. He wasn't doing his homework. He was not prepared to a bare minimum level. Again, this was only a progress grade. We did get him on a path to getting his homework done, learning how to do these statistical tests, and doing better on things in the future. And he wasn't a great student after that, but I will say that he did shape up a little bit. I was doing the right thing to mold him in the right direction to start doing better work the rest of that semester. Once I ended up explaining all of this to the headmaster, I got my way. I was able to not have to change the grade, not have to give the kid a makeup test that I did not sanction, and handle the situation my way. So in a way, I won the argument. I got the headmaster to back off of me. However, this whole situation destroyed my relationship with this headmaster. He was embarrassed because he had overstepped. He had gone too far in dictating a particular course of action, and it wounded his ego. And the fact is that he had been there only for about a year or two, whereas I'd been teaching at the school for 7 years, but we hadn't really had a whole lot of social interaction, got to know each other very well up to that point. And because this was the first time we were really having a lot of professional interaction, I feel like things became super awkward with me and this headmaster for the entire rest of the time I was working at the school. Now, I was sort of fortunate in that it was my last year at the school. I was actually leaving shortly after that. I feel like if I had decided to stay a lot longer than that, it could have made things very, very awkward in terms of a very awkward long-term relationship with my boss. However, my then wife, who was a psychologist, talked to me about the situation, and she even showed me some psychology articles and talked about this phenomenon that when people defame other people, when they give false news and people build a false first impression about people based on stories that are not true, that even when those lies are later dispelled, even when they find out that the things they were told about the person are not true, it still affects their perception of that person. It still affects their feelings toward that person. And I very much saw that firsthand, is that even though this father had told stories that were completely defamatory, completely false about me, it did do permanent damage to my relationship with this headmaster and to us ever having a healthy and trusting professional relationship with each other. So the point of this whole story is that people who defame do a lot of irreversible damage. There are many, many different ways in which the people who defamed me in the Scrabble community have done incredible amounts of damage to me and my relationship with other people in the Scrabble community that cannot and will never be repaired. They've also done tons of emotional damage to me in terms of the PTSD that I've gotten, in terms of the stress that I've been under, in terms of the physical effects of this illness on me. And a lot of that can never, ever be undone. So I am trying to get this ban lifted and have open access to Scrabble tournaments again, which I definitely should have, but I need more than that. I need justice. And quite simply, there is no way that I can be even compensated, I can be, in any way given enough to make up for the damage that was done to me. Part of what needs to happen in order for justice to be served here is that the people who defamed me need to be punished. They need to actually experience a loss of reputation that is deserving. And if you think about it, there is no more deserving punishment than that. If you cause a massive amount of damage to another person's life, much of which is irreversible through lies, the most fitting punishment, the most karmic thing that could possibly happen to you is to have your own reputation destroyed through truth. And what I want to make very clear about this here is that this is not just a matter of vengeance. This is a matter of fairness for the world, is that people can destroy other people's lives. They can do a massive amount of irreversible damage through defamation. And the only way you can actually put a check on that power is to make sure that the people who do defame have their own reputations destroyed for defaming, for deceiving people, so that they can no longer do the same kind of damage to other people. And this is what I absolutely want as an outcome of this story, is not just me being made whole, but all of the people who told these horrible lies about me having their own reputations destroyed based on truth, based on what they actually did, so that everyone in the Scrabble world and everywhere else knows not to trust them, so that they can never ever hurt me or anyone else in this defamatory way again. They deserve to lose all trust, all belief in everything that they say because they've shown themselves to be that terrible.